If you have topics you would like to have us discuss on the Aging Well podcast, please click on the links in the episode description to send us a text or record your message or comments. We'd love to hear from you and how we can help you age well. If you benefit from the Aging Well podcast and would like to support the content financially, please click on the Support the Show link or support our affiliates and advertisers. Welcome to the Aging Well podcast. I'm Jeff Armstrong here with Corbin Bruton. In this and the episodes that follow, we will share candid discussions on aging and hear from the experts. We are here to inform and encourage as we experience, aging. In this episode, Dr. Armstrong and Corbin Bruton introduced the concept of the suck factor. This is a concept of the relative exertion and effectiveness of cardiorespiratory exercise. In addition, we explore the effectiveness of 10,000 steps a day versus a high-intensity exercise for fat loss.
In the past, we've talked about different articles that we've come across and what is good information for our listeners and what is comical information based off of the science. And I came across one article, and in that article, they discussed one particular study as far as weight loss and getting your steps in. The article was, "Does walking 10,000 steps a day help you lose weight?" And I thought, what a great topic for the aging well population that we can kind of dive into.
Sounds good.
Yeah. All right. So what's your opinion as an exercise science professor that teaches health and wellness? What's your opinion on the 10,000 steps a day?
Well, again, with that article, the paper that they're referencing in the article that you read is a study that was done at Brigham Young University titled "The Impact of Step Recommendations on Body Composition and Physical Activity Patterns in College Freshman Women, a Randomized Trial." No wonder more people are likely to read, "Does walking 10,000 steps a day help you lose weight?" And essentially the lifestyle article is just simply rehashing the study. And personally, I think when we talk about the number of steps, we're really talking more about a level of physical activity, not exercise. Now, 10,000 steps is approximately about 5 miles of walking. So it's a reasonable amount of walking, but I know I can get about 3 miles a day walking the dogs. So that's fairly easy. And I probably get the remaining of my steps pacing around, teaching, walking back and forth across campus and doing other stuff. And so accumulating 10,000 steps is a reasonable goal for health. But like the study demonstrated, it's not going to do a whole heck of a lot to affect weight loss. And so what we really need to focus in on is burning as many calories as we can, but also restricting our calories, eating better, and we need to exercise. We need to do more than just simply move.
They didn't really include the factor of nutrition that you were putting into your body. They were suggesting getting your steps in, but some of the research in that article was also saying, even though you hit 10,000 steps, it's not necessarily a guaranteed thing to lose weight. But they weren't throwing in the other factors, such as the intake of food or how many calories that you're taking in versus how many calories you're burning. They weren't talking about how the amount of sleep you were getting. And I don't know about you, but if you recall being a freshman in college, away from home, very first term, it was kind of stressful. It was a new environment, being away from family, childhood friends, starting this new chapter of essentially your adult life. And it can be a little stressful, and people have that learning curve and adapting to it. And a part of that adaptation is getting on a good sleep cycle or a good sleep pattern, which can also affect the amount of calories that you're burning a day.
Well, that and just the kind of foods that college freshmen eat and college students in general.
Right.
I mean, nutrition is just not there.
Freshman 15.
The freshman 15.
Or freshman 50.
We referred to it when I was in school. But the study basically just looked at a difference between 10,000, 12,500 and 15,000 steps. There's not a huge difference. I mean, the difference between 10,000 and 1,500 is probably an additional like 2.5 miles. But I think one concern I'd have with this study, since it doesn't appear like they've really done much to control for dietary intake,
Right.
Which theoretically, if you went to your college meal plan and in the dorms you're eating essentially the same meals, calories should be pretty similar, but I don't think that that's controlled for quite at colleges anymore. It's not like prison where they scoop it into your tray and you move on, you get the same amount of food no matter what. So, and then there's snacking and all those types of things. So I have a feeling that part of this reason why there might not be a significant difference between the groups is that you may have some of these individuals that are in the 15,000 step group thinking, okay, I'm getting more activity, I can eat a little bit more.
Right.
And so that might be part of it as well. And we've talked a lot about what types of exercises and activities are going to be most essential for health and for fitness. And I don't want to like poo-poo just walking, but I think walking is simply physical activity and obviously get as much of it as we can. And with other things in control, it's going to have an effect on your body composition, at least slowing the progress of gaining weight if you're not eating well. But it's not going to significantly impact overall fitness because most of if you're walking 10,000, 15,000 steps, you're probably doing it at a fairly consistent pace. You're not doing it as exercise, meaning that you are purposefully doing it to improve your health, body composition, or performance. You're just simply doing it to get to and from classes. And maybe these students were like counting their steps, and then just once they hit their 10,000, they kind of stop, which I could see happening in this study. It's like, I can't walk more because I'm in this study and I'm only supposed to be walking 10,000 steps and I've already gotten it. So I'm going to have to get a ride to campus this afternoon because I used my steps up. And so it's not promoting the idea of using your body and getting more steps and getting more active.
Well, another factor that they didn't consider is they also didn't consider how are you walking? Are you walking on just a flat surface? Like, is the campus flat? Are they going hiking on an incline base? You know what I mean? That's also going to throw factors into it as well. Correct?
Yeah. Now, I've never been on BYU's campus. I imagine in Utah, it's going to be pretty hilly, but I'm not sure. I know I went to West Virginia University and there were some significant hills on campus. And so that could have an impact on, where you live relative to campus could have a big effect on the quality of the steps that you're getting.
Right.
I lived in a fraternity house for a number of years. It was at the very peak in Morgantown. And I remember one time it snowed about 2 inches while I was in class, and I had worn cowboy boots to class. I literally had to crawl on my hands and feet up the hill because I would slide down otherwise. And so I'm like digging my toes and my fingers in to just get up that hill. So it's pretty hilly there. But the dorm I lived in was like,
I can't
right
picture
in the
you
valley.
wearing cowboy boots.
Oh, yeah. I loved cowboy boots back then.
That's I don't see you being a cowboy boot guy.
Oh, yeah. Anyhow, it's not about me. It's about walking today.
Walking hills, incline.
Yes.
Calories burning.
Yeah. And so what do you think about walking to maintain or to improve body composition?
I think there's other articles and other studies that are out there. I think that there's a lot of science-based evidence that walking can be a good source of maintaining. If you look at a lot of the bodybuilders, one of their main forms of cardio is actually walking for either 30, 45 minutes. Typically they'll do it on like an incline treadmill, or they will lift really, really heavy. And then afterwards they'll just go like on a loop around the neighborhood, maybe like a 3 mile little walk or loop. And there's significant amount of research that is out there that suggests that just walking is a good source to maintain, but it's not the only one. And there's also research that's out there is there's other factors that go into place with that walking. So if your mindset is, I'm going to be healthy and I'm just going to walk and I'm not going to do anything else, like I'm not going to watch my calories, I'm not going to lift heavy, I'm not going to get a good amount of sleep, well, then you're kind of counterintuitive, right?
Yeah. Now, I would contest the idea that the walking that bodybuilders are doing is cardio.
Okay.
Yeah, or that they're even doing it for cardio. They're doing it for the purposes of increasing caloric expenditure to burn calories and maintain a lower muscle mass. But they're also doing it because they can burn calories at such a low intensity that it is not significantly affecting their recoverability from the exercise. And so it's a very effective way of getting extra calories expended, albeit in a rather long duration. But, if we're moving more throughout the day, those steps are accumulating and those calories expended are accumulating without significantly impacting our ability to recover. Cardio is an exercise. When we're talking about doing activity, physical activity to improve cardiorespiratory endurance, it has to be of an intensity and duration long enough to improve stroke volume and arteriovenous oxygen difference, our capacity to both deliver and to utilize oxygen. And that is going to require to stress on the heart, stress on the cardiovascular system, stress on the muscles. That's going to have some need for improved or for duration of recovery. And so you're lifting heavy and you're doing hard cardio. First of all, it challenges both of those to respond adequately. And so you're not going to get as much muscle growth and you're not going to get as much cardiovascular improvement. And so the reason there's an increase in preference to do walking for added activity for bodybuilders is because it's going to allow them to work hard in the gym, push a lot of weight, do a lot of volume, stimulate the muscle growth, and allow for recovery and allow for that walking as a low intensity to be able to sufficiently facilitate recovery while still burning calories. And so I go back to when I see people walking rather slowly for cardio, and I have air quotes in there that can't be seen online.
I think someday we should get a little.
I don't know if the world is ready for our faces in a video.
We got to give the people what they want.
Yeah, they want to not see my face. But I don't call that cardio. I think it's great that they're increasing that physical activity. But like I've said many times, if you are walking to Starbucks and coming home with a hot venti coffee, you're not doing cardio if you can carry a hot cup of coffee in your hand, because you're not moving hard enough or fast enough to stimulate the cardiovascular system. And it's great. You're going to be burning calories. It is a little bit surprising that in this study that there wasn't some offset of caloric gain between the three groups. But again, it's a small difference, and there are so many other factors taken into account there. But I guarantee if you had somebody that's not coming close to that 10,000 steps, they're gaining more weight than the person that's in the 15,000.
Right.
So I think it's an important education for college-aged men and women to move as much as possible, walk to class instead of taking your car and driving around the parking lot for 20 minutes trying to find a parking space right next to the building. Walk or park further away and walk a little bit. But the more that we can add to that walking, the more we're going to burn calories. But we have to account for the need to improve cardiorespiratory endurance, muscle strength, muscle endurance, and the other factors of health and performance.
Well, one thing that is really good about walking is, and we've mentioned it in previous podcast, is it's that baby step, right? It is essentially, it's a gateway it's a gateway to your exercise journey. Anyone can walk. It doesn't cost anything to walk.
Anybody can walk.
A good
Most
majority of
people
people can walk.
Yeah.
Right? It doesn't cost much, and it can be challenging if someone is really out of shape or really, in a high obese category. But it can be a gateway. It can be that mental mindset. And you've mentioned, instead of parking really close, they can park farther away. Well, eventually parking farther away, they're like, hey, I can do this. This isn't that bad. I'm going to add a couple more steps. Maybe I'm going to wake up early and just walk a few laps around the track. And, through that, I think that there are different forms of walking. I think hiking is a great form. And I think through walking, the longer walks you get, whether you're walking with a buddy or you're out in nature by yourself and you're just kind of thinking as you're walking and you're processing and you're not thinking, oh man, this sucks. Just like you do. I don't know if you do that when you're running, if you're doing a 5K or a 10K and you're like, man, this is that last, 10, 15 minutes of your run. You're like, man, I want to stop, but I have a goal. Walking for me personally, I don't really get that, but I'm able to kind of think a lot of other things and process stuff. And, it's kind of a good mental clarification that goes in with walking.
Well, and I think that's what differentiates between physical activity and exercise. And, you remember from classes about the Borg scale, that,
right.
Perceived exertion. Maybe we need to have like the suck scale. And, the degree to which this activity sucks is what's going to indicate whether it's exercise or physical activity. And so, you go on a hike and, it's enjoyable. You're not breathing too much. Yeah, it's a little bit more work, but it's still a bit more physical activity, and it's certainly something that we should be doing, but we can still be doing the exercise in order to improve our capacity. Right. And, it's always relative too, so I can go hiking with people, and that same hike for me might be very easy, very relaxing, but for somebody else, it's much more stressful, the up and down the hills, and it's harder to keep up. And so, you had mentioned for people significantly out of shape and maybe very obese, walking is that kind of that gateway or whatever. It's their baby step. It's their start.
Right.
And it's exercise.
And you got to start somewhere.
It's stressful to them, and it's going to initiate an adaptation. But at some point, it's going to become easier and easier and easier. And then something else has to be done in order to improve the performance. But when we go back to calories, it's all about burning the calories through movement. And I always like to teach about the 100 kilocalorie rule. I don't recall if you would recall that, but the 100 kilocalorie rule is essentially that for the average size person, whether you walk, jog, or run a mile, you're burning 100 kilocalories. And so it doesn't matter how we do it, we're burning those calories. And so on a daily basis, if I park my car a quarter of a mile further away than I normally would, well, then I'm having to walk to and from an additional half mile. So that's 50 kilocalories. Well, add that up over the course of a year, that accumulates to a lot of calories and can offset a significant amount of weight gain. Do a little bit more, do that multiple times through the day, or take the stairs instead of an elevator a few times. And those calories and that activity begins to accumulate. And I think that should be a focus and a recommendation for anybody, is to just simply begin to increase your activity as much as possible, but don't neglect trying to incorporate some level of exercise into that program.
Right. Like, don't be sedentary. Get the exercise, get that movement in, put it in your physical activity bank, as you will, which is going to carry forward through that aging well process.
There you go.
Okay. All right. Well, what do you think about a pendulum swing, going from walking and then swinging all the way over to the other side of the physical activity spectrum, where you're really pushing yourself and exerting yourself maybe going through, I don't know, an intense circuit training course. What do you think about that?
Absolutely. And I think, it's important to consider again that exercise continuum and what benefits do we get as we move from physical activity to low intensity, steady state cardiovascular exercise, which is kind of on that cusp between physical activity and exercise. And again, we're moving up on that suck scale. I
Right.
think I've actually created something here, the suck scale. But, so when I'm just walking, and I'm not dressed in attire where I want to break a sweat and doing those types of things, I'm really doing more physical activity. But where I'm starting now to more intentionally break the sweat, get my heart rate up. Now I'm starting, even though it might be still a walk and rather low intensity and steady state, maybe starting to potentially improve my cardiovascular. And we start ramping that up, and then we start moving from maybe a walk to a jog to a run. And then we can start looking at the interval training and the benefits that that has for us. And then, that opens up a whole nother kind of can of worms in a sense of what is the benefit of doing more high intensity interval type of work, shorter duration rather than longer duration work, and so on. And so, I believe recently I guess I shared it with you. I came across an article, again in Testosterone Nation.
T-Nation.
Yeah, T Nation. We've gone to them a lot, and they all generally have some pretty good stuff. And so, but they have one article that was written recently. I'm not sure how old the article is, but it's titled "The World's Fastest Workout for Fat Loss," and it basically says that the fastest workout will give you results in just 30 seconds. How is that possible? It has to do with leptin, and here's why and how to do it. And so they kind of go into this idea of leptin, and leptin is, becoming increasingly better understood in its process in terms of how it affects our fat storage. It's been known for years, but it's only really been recently that we understand now that the fat tissue is actually more of an endocrine gland as opposed to just simply a storage for fat, but that leptin plays a critical role in why some people struggle to lose weight and others struggle to put weight on. Leptin is a hormone that helps to regulate that appetite. It helps to manage our fat mass. It affects our metabolic rate.
Mm-hmm.
And so normally, fat's releasing that in response to a meal, and eventually that's going to tell us to stop eating. And for some individuals, that works better than it works for other individuals. And so for some, it's going to allow them to maintain a leaner body composition more naturally, and others have a bigger struggle. But the interesting thing with leptin is that it continues to increase as adiposity increases, as we get fatter. But there are other things that interfere with its receptors as such that it actually has less and less effect, and we become actually what's referred to as leptin resistant.
Mm.
And so if we can do something to trigger leptin activity, and we can keep leptin being effective and keep it, having its proper receptors, then we can better manage our body composition. And so the article talks a little bit about factors that affect leptin. And again, as we mentioned, excess fat stores is going to increase its release, but it's going to be ineffective. Stress can have an effect on it. Estrogens have an effect. Insulin, other, like cortisol and things like that have an effect. But things that cause us to inhibit that leptin secretion are going to be things like fasting. And so if we're inhibiting it, what's that doing? That's telling us to eat more,
Mm-hmm.
right? And, when we're in the catecholamines, the thyroid, anything that is stimulating the body to increase size and attempts to increase fat stores and so on like that is going to increase leptin. And so they basically talk about a study that was done in the 90s that looked at mice and they basically had them just do really high intensity work, and it affected leptin. And then they looked at another study that was done in the early I guess it was 2011, that used the Wingate test, which is a 30-second all-out effort to examine how leptin was affected by that workout. And they looked at in a fasted state versus individuals who had just had glucose ingestion. And they basically found that leptin was increased greater and the sensitivity was increased greater following a high intensity, short duration anaerobic bout in a fasted state. And so the basic take home of this article is that you do, just high intensity activity in a fasted state is going to stimulate your leptin and may actually be better at promoting fat loss. So what do you think about all of that?
Well, would that be because your body in an unfasted state, your body's pulling the carbohydrates that you've taken in and it's using that first and foremost, but then in a fasted state, your body's like, burning calories is like starting a fire, essentially, right? Mm-hmm. And carbohydrates are kind of like the kindles. And then once you get it burning and it's nice and hot, then you can drop a log on it, right? Mm-hmm. That's what fat is. That's my metaphor that I'm thinking. So with that, why it would make sense that, if you don't have those kindles to start off with, but you still have some remaining built up in storage, well, eventually you gotta start chopping up logs, make them smaller, and then throwing them on. So eventually you're pulling from your fat, your stored carbohydrate, your stored glycogen levels. And instead of using the excess amount, which would be in a non-fasted state, right? You're looking confused. Am I all over the place?
A little all over the place there, I think.
Long story short, based off the study, I'm agreeing with it. I'm saying that you would be seeing more results doing high intensity training in a fasted state versus your results of doing high intensity in a fasted state. Now, with that also being said, you may be burning more calories or more fat during your actual exercise in a fasted state, but in a unfasted state, your blood sugar levels are up, right? So you're not feeling as woozy or as fatigued during your workout, meaning you're able to go way more intense, which is going to have that afterburn effect. Am I wrong in that?
I think I'm following a little bit.
Okay.
I think essentially, what you're somewhat alluding to is that the research is kind of all over the place.
Yeah, I'm thinking, yes.
There has been, a general feeling that it was pretty conclusive that exercising doing cardio in a fasted state doesn't really significantly affect your overall changes in body composition. And so I think a lot of those days you have to just kind of take with a bit of a grain of salt, not literally, a grain of glucose. But I think when we look at this study from 2011, it's basically saying that in a fasted state, if we do something to just kind of kick into that anaerobic metabolism, mm-hmm. we're going to stimulate the release of leptin, which is going to, if we're doing that regularly enough, it's going to have a better overall effect in regulating our appetite and our utilization of the fat for energy.
Right.
And so, again, it kind of goes back to rather than just walking steady state all the time, mm-hmm. let's ramp it up. Let's get some bursts in there. So maybe for many of people, it's going to be, between meals, when we're in a semi-fasted state. It doesn't have to be a fully fasted state, but take those stairs, when you're going to work or to class or something like that. Take them hard, book up the steps as kind of as fast as your body's capable of doing. Your heart rate's going to be up a little bit, but that might be enough to trigger a little bit more fat burning beyond that. And if you do that frequently enough, it's going to have a little bit greater benefit.
I discussed my epigenetics test with True Diagnostic co-founder Hannah Wendt in episode 162. Epigenetic testing measures baseline and changes in your pace of aging, giving you the power to steer your anti-aging or health and wellness journey in the right direction. I learned that I am aging well. Click on the affiliate link in the episode description, use the promo code AGEWELL, and receive a 12% discount on your epigenetics test and monitor your pace of aging.
I can see it now. Bunch of college students wanting to do their aging well process, and they're winded walking into a classroom, and what's wrong with you? Oh, nothing. I sprinted up the stairs. I was listening to Aging Well, and this is the beginning of my journey.
Generally, since my classrooms are on the third floor, most students are coming into class huffing and puffing and complaining about the steps. So maybe it's just benefiting them. But, I think we also have to look at then when we're burning calories, whether if we're doing cardio for both performance, to improve VO2 max and to burn calories, it doesn't really necessarily matter whether you're in a fasted or a unfasted state. Having some food in you might help some people burn more calories and, more importantly, be able to work at an intensity to stimulate cardiovascular improvement. In a fasted state, it might be a little bit harder, but you're still burning the calories, you're still doing the work. So I think we shouldn't get hooked up in that when we're trying to talk about when should I do my cardio. I look at it like, for me, I have to exercise in a fasted state because I have to be up. The only window I have for significant working out is first thing in the morning, and that's getting up at 4:30 in the morning. I'm not going to have time to really eat anything. I might, and I usually don't even drink like a carbohydrate drink during the workout. I just have my creatine mixed in with a little bit of one of those little squirts to give it some flavor. And I do that. And then I eat afterwards. And,
right.
So I'm eating in a more or less more deprived state. And so the muscles now, starved for carbohydrate and protein, are going to absorb those carbohydrates. And so more likely that's going to go into muscle as opposed to going into fat. The bulk of my carbohydrates are going to be surrounding those workouts. And then, generally less carbohydrates throughout the day. But that allows me to get my workout in. If I had to wait until I was fully fueled, I'm not going to get the workout in. Although I do find that I get better workouts if I can do them in the afternoon after my body's warmed up and I've eaten a little bit. But it's not that significant of a difference. And if it's a matter of doing or not doing, then just do it and don't worry about it. To improve cardio, again, same thing for me. I don't think it matters all that much whether I do it fasted or unfasted. But if we're looking at leptin levels and trying to trigger a little bit more fat loss, then we can start talking about the role that intensity plays in that. And I think there's an increasing amount of literature coming out that's showing that the higher the intensity, the more we're ultimately going to trigger some fat loss. And I'm a big proponent of shorter cardio workouts with more higher intensity intervals. And again, intensity is individualized. So what is high intensity for me isn't going to be the same as it might be for you or somebody else. And so those intervals should be what we perceive, again, on the suck scale, hitting it hard on the suck scale for at least, anywhere from 20 to 30 seconds or more, and then recovering from that. I like the Tabata principle of training, although I know that the vast majority of us can't do a true Tabata workout, but that doesn't mean it's not of some benefit to do even say maybe about a 10-minute workout that has 4 minutes of that Tabata protocol where you're going as all out as you can for 20 seconds, recovering for 10, and repeating that 8 times. So you're getting a total of really 4 minutes of intensive cardio, and that's going to have some benefit. And I think that or any other high intensity interval training protocol is going to have benefits, because what happens is that we see an increase, and this may go to the leptin. I haven't seen any studies with this, but as we start studying leptin a little bit more, I think what we might be finding is that leptin levels are going to be elevated for a more prolonged period of time. And what I've seen in some of the studies is that you might see the caloric expenditure be elevated for, say, roughly 15 kilocalories for as much as 24 hours or longer. Well, those extra calories are adding up over time. That you're actually burning more fat over that period of time than had you done a lower intensity, longer workout that in that workout burned more calories, but you recovered faster from.
Well, you mentioned if we were to dive more into it, we would probably see an increase in leptin. Do you think that has to do with the type of stress that we're putting on our body, like in those 30-second bursts? Do you think it's because we're fully activated and we're just going absolutely intense versus that low impact steady state? It's a different type of stress that you're putting on to your body.
It's really a stress. I mean, it's not a different stress. It's just simply a stress. I mean, I think when you're going low intensity, steady state exercise, your body's not perceiving that as a stressor. That's normal. Our bodies are intended to be moving. It's our society now that we have become increasingly inactive, that we perceive any movement as being exercise, which is a pretty sad state to be in as human beings. But, if you go back to our long ago ancestors, they were constantly moving. That was their transportation. That was their means of gathering food. It wasn't drive to the grocery store and, walk briefly. And in some cases, you see people that are so unhealthy that they have to kind of go around in those little motorized chairs in the grocery store. And I feel for those people. I'm not knocking them, but in some cases, that's the product of this horribly inactive society in which we live in, that people get to those extremes of inability because they aren't active, and it snowballs. We get inactive, you get less active, and
Right.
you get less active, you get more less active, more or less. Is that right? But you kind of get the point, right? That we are needing to increase our overall activity, but then we also need to increase our capacity to do more activity. And that's where exercise comes in and where it differentiates from physical activity. And that high intensity stuff, our body is perceiving that as a potential stress that might be more prolonged or more frequent, and it's going to respond to adapt to that. And so I don't know that we understand all the full mechanisms, especially of something like a Tabata, true Tabata, not air quote Tabata type of workout, why that or any really high intensity interval training type of program stimulates such an adaptation on a more cellular level. That's a little bit beyond maybe the scope of some of my research and things like that. I'm sure there's some researchers out there that have really dived into, these cellular signaling that's going on that triggers those responses. But, for most of our readers, they don't care to hear about what are those signals and how do they function and all that. They just want to hear what's going to work.
Right.
And I think the best bang for our buck and our time is to try and get as many of those high intensity, short interval, kind of anaerobic bouts into our day to trigger a cardiovascular response. Because remember from metabolism that if we are doing something, you do a single Wingate bout, which is 30 seconds, all out effort. You do that, you're in an anaerobic state. You're not using oxygen. But what are you doing when you're done? You're huffing and puffing. You're breathing, trying to recover because now oxidative energy systems are being pulled in to try and replace all that energy that had been used. And our glycogen has been depleted. And so our muscles are like, hey, insulin, come on, let's get over here, bring that sugar in, let's get glucose, and let's refuel this muscle because this guy might do another bout of this stuff. And so we tend to favor putting glucose into the muscle rather than putting it into fat stores. But if you're doing low intensity steady state and just doing that for like a single bout and you're pretty inactive the rest of the day, the body is going to tend to favor fat storage over putting that in the muscle because the muscles aren't really being depleted of glycogen in those workouts. And so I think there's really, really something to be said for, the fastest workout for fat loss is the fastest workout it takes to burn the same number of calories or similar number of calories.
Do you think it also has to do with like how bad an individual wants it? Not just hitting their weight loss goals, but how bad did they want to challenge themselves? How bad did they want to, because we talked about that suck factor. And a lot of people, once they starting to hit that realm of, man, this is difficult. I don't want to do this anymore. Their subconscious or their body's like, yeah, it's okay. Let's take it easy. Let's stop. But you mentioned what our ancestors used to do. And, there's historical evidence out there where our ancestors would hunt an elk or a deer and they would just follow it and follow it and follow it. And then the deer or the elk would run away. And then here we come as humans just running after it. And then the elk would run away and we're still running. We're not as fast as it, but eventually that elk would get tired and then just, okay, I'm done. But the human body is capable of great things. The human body is capable of going beyond its limit, right? And we kind of mentioned it. Whatever we do, whatever stress that we put on it, the more intense that stress is, it's going to adapt accordingly. If you have less stress on it, it's going to adapt accordingly. It's going to hold on to that fat storage versus, putting that in that high intense stress and saying, I don't need this fat because I don't want to go through that hard time. I need to be ready the next time the person whose mind is in control of this body is going to do that to me again. No?
Yeah, I think you're right. There's so much there. I didn't know where to kind of address the question. So, I think, from the standpoint of the willingness, I mean, that's more along the exercise motivation spectrum.
Right.
And I'm not even sure kind of where the question is there.
Most people should want to either be a better version of themselves. It's not a body composition thing. It can fall into that category, but you should want to add longevity to your life, right? And that's kind of our goal, is to have people age well. And if they want to do that and they want to take those baby steps, it could start off as walking, but eventually they got to want more. They got to want to improve, right? And so that's where my question was coming from. Do you think it's a want factor? Do you want to say, I'm uncomfortable at this moment in time, but I know if I push through this suck factor, if I push through this difficult challenge, it's not going to be as difficult the next go around?
I think that's part of it. I think you have, a lot of people that the will is there, but the capacity might not be, or, the physiological challenges are just too great to be able to keep up with that. So it's highly individualized. I mean, I think in what you've talked about, it brings up, two real principles of adaptation. One is specificity, that the body's going to make specific adaptations to impose demands. And if we don't address the right demand, we're not going to get the right response. But also, everybody is different. And when it comes to exercise, we don't all respond the same way to exercise. We don't all have the same mental capacity to push ourselves. And some of that's genetic. I mean, I think they haven't identified specific genes. And a book I really love that I've used in classes before is David Epstein's The Sports Gene. And he talks in that book about the worrier warrior gene and how we really kind of both types of people in society, and that you need both. And some people tend to be more warriors, some tend to be warriors. It's a little hard to understand which I'm saying. But when we look at athletes tend to have a much greater capacity to push themselves. And that's why partly why they're successful athletes, is because all else being equal, they have that capacity to just push the extra little inch, the extra little mile. And some people just don't have that. And so it makes it much more difficult for them to be able to do that. Now, some people really, really lack in it. And some of that is because they have gotten so out of shape that the inertia needed to be overcome to be able to do that is so great. And this is where I love the baby steps idea. You have to just take the initial steps, whether we can get individuals to want to better themselves. That is the holy grail, I think, of exercise science, is finding what will get everybody much more active. Because I know we've mentioned it before, recent statistics coming out of COVID is that fewer than 23% of the US population meets the minimum guidelines for physical activity. And we're talking just physical activity. That's getting those like 10,000 steps a day, 23%. That means 77% of the population is pretty darn near morbidly sedentary, not doing anything. And that needs to change in order to improve health. And so if we really want to age well and get the population to age well, we need to get that other 77% of the people just simply moving a little bit more. And that might just be, focusing in on getting your 10,000 steps, building that to 1250 or 12,500. I don't want to keep saying 1250 to 15,000, and
throwing in a 5x5 program,
yeah.
Right?
Well, it doesn't have to be the 5x5 program.
Throwing in resistance training.
Resistance training, I think, is an important step in there. But for many, they're not going to get there until they just simply start moving and doing some stuff. For some individuals, that resistance training is simply standing and sitting. And, so everybody starts somewhere, but the key is to have a place to go and to get people with a vision to be moving in that direction. And then as we move in that direction, then we start kind of moving across that continuum of exercise a little bit more. And we go from just simply doing low intensity, steady state exercise to a little bit more intensity, to eventually doing some interval type of training. And then hopefully, even before we're kind of moving in that, we're looking at the other end, at the strength and the muscle endurance side. But for many people, just getting some muscle endurance type of work in there, building up the capacity to do the heavy lifting. So a 5x5 might not necessarily work for everybody who is really, really sedentary because they can't push the intensity enough. Now, the true 5x5 program accounts for that. I mean, you start off, minimal weight, and you just keep adding 5 pounds until you build up some strength. But, we're not going to have people lifting 3 repetitions at 90% of their 1 repetition maximum if they haven't built up some level of muscle endurance and capacity. And this is where periodization kind of comes into play too. That we want to be working on improving our strength, improving our muscle endurance, improving our cardiorespiratory endurance. And sometimes that takes a little bit of cycling in order to allow for our improvement in cardiorespiratory endurance, to improve our muscle and help us work on improving our muscle endurance. And in that, working on building our strength, we get stronger. Now we can do more cardio. And I think that's what we've talked about a lot, is that the reason for doing strength training is because it's going to allow us to potentiate that cardiovascular development, to be able to at least maintain our level of cardiovascular. But if all we do is low intensity, steady state exercise, I can guarantee that we are going to slow down and we are going to be doing less and less as we age. We need to kind of ramp into that intensity a little bit more.
Well said, man. It's great.
I hope it was well said. I don't know.
No,
see if people understand it.
No, it was very inspiring, very motivational. So
anything else with this?
I think that we just talked about an absolute pendulum swing. I think we just talked about the baby steps, the gateway exercise of those 10,000 steps. I think if someone's wanting to start their journey to age well, or their journey to have more of a healthy lifestyle, then a 10,000 step a day goal is a good starting base. But on the opposite end of that spectrum, you can't just be okay with just 10,000 steps. There has to be the next goal in order to see results or see change or see overall wellness. You're going to have to push the body and push yourself. And it's not just physically, it's going to be emotional. It's going to be mental at the same time, because there's going to be a lot of times when you transition from that 10,000 step, which can be difficult, but it's going to get easier. And as you're transitioning to that more hit style or hurt style, either way, that suck factor, it's going to make itself present. Your body's going to say, don't put me through this. This sucks. Your mind is going to say, we can go back to bed. It's okay. But you have to want it, right?
Yeah.
And then just know there is a process with it, and it's going to get easier. You're going to feel better. You're going to live longer. Your immune system's going to get better. Just trust the process and really push yourself. And what an accomplishment it is to actually push yourself through that suck factor and then look back and say, I did that. That's awesome.
Yeah. But, when we say that with exercise, it's going to get easier, I don't agree with that, because if it's getting easier, you're neglecting that principle of progression and overload. And so, yeah, what you are doing will get easier, but once it starts getting easier, once that suck factor, this doesn't suck quite as much, then you need to do something to make it suck a little bit more. And you need to build up your tolerance of that suck factor. I think that's going to be the title of this podcast, is the suck factor.
The suck factor.
But, we tend to neglect that in our own exercise programming, is that we get kind of comfortable with what we're doing and we just keep doing the same. And that doesn't necessarily benefit us. We have to start really looking at, what can I do to push myself a little bit more? We don't have to beat ourselves up. It's not about training like an athlete, where athletes beat their bodies up for really extreme levels of performance. This is just doing enough to push the body's limits, just enough to stimulate an adaptation. And if we're not overloading, we're not progressing that workout, then we're really stagnating. And in some cases, we might feel, okay, I'm pretty content. I'm at a high level of fitness. I'm not an athlete. I'm not going to be progressing quite as aggressively, but, we can still try and ramp it up a little bit, or, maintain it, that as our bodies are maybe aging, that, the intensity that's producing that level of suck factor is going down a little bit, but it shouldn't go down dramatically as we tend to perceive it will with aging. We want to be able to maintain a level of work that is going to allow us to do more as we age, and to age more effectively and to age well.
I think you're right. I also think when I say it's going to get easier, I mean, you're going to look back on your process and maybe it's like, man, I could only do 3,000 steps a day. And now I'm doing 17,000 steps. Your range of suck is getting further and further out. Or, I could only bench press doing dumbbell bench press with 25s in each hand. And now I'm doing 90. That struggle of pushing those last few reps in is still there, but look how much I've accomplished. And those 25s, that's like air to me. That's what I meant with.
Yeah, no,
I fully agree with you.
I think, for a lot of people, that perception of exercise is like, they get to a certain point and they get in a habit, they don't allow themselves to progress enough. And if you're looking back and you're not seeing any change over recent months and years, even though you're exercising regularly, you're not necessarily benefiting yourself. But that person who, just getting up and out of a chair is strenuous activity.
Mhm.
And then eventually now they're getting into the weight room. And this is why nobody should ever mock anybody for what they're doing in the gym, because they're doing something.
Right.
And it may not be what the big buff guy across the gym is doing, but for them, if they're doing it with intensity and intent and conviction and commitment, they're benefiting themselves. And they might only be curling the 10-pound dumbbells, but that's hard for them. But if they keep curling the 10-pound dumbbells as it gets easier, it's not benefiting them. But you start adding a little bit more weight, that progression is eventually going to get them further along that journey. And I think if I can underscore anything for everybody is, just keep doing something and progress toward a greater goal. I always like to say, be your best today, be better tomorrow. And that needs to be our conviction in exercise. And so if you're not hitting 10,000 steps, don't worry about doing a 30-second all-out effort, because it's not going to benefit you quite as much. You might get hurt. But progress toward getting that 10,000 steps. But once we're getting that 10,000 steps and we're meeting a basic minimal guideline for physical activity, now we can start looking at what can I do to exercise better. And now I can start looking at, okay, now I've been walking. I'm going to use my walking for recreation, but I'm going to get on a bike. I'm going to get on a treadmill, and I'm going to do some hard bouts. I don't have to do, an hour of cardio every day. I can get this done in rather short sessions. 10 to 12 minute session can improve your cardiovascular health. And that then allows you to improve your strength and improve your muscle endurance. And so be focusing in on all aspects of your health so that one is feeding the other. And we're just constantly getting better.
So kind of the take home message is no matter what phase you're starting on your journey, don't compare yourself to anyone else. And there truly is an importance in hitting a PR. And the P in PR is personal, right? So the R is a record. You're hitting a personal record. I'm not, if you and I were to squat, I might be squatting way more than you. But
Sorry, I didn't mean to laugh there.
I'm just saying.
You're not going to squat more than me.
I can. I
Yeah.
bet I could.
Let's go downstairs.
Okay. Yeah. I'm squatting.
I might have skinny legs, but I can squat fairly.
Regardless,
Not joking.
it would be a PR to hit, for either me or for you. And there's something about gym culture that's really awesome. And I know it can be really intimidating for individuals because of what you see on TV or media. And you're like, man, I don't want to do that. But there is a difference. I've worked at several different gyms, anywhere between rec centers to actual gyms themselves. And there is a culture there. It doesn't matter where you start. If you continue to show up and become a regular, the other regulars in that gym support you and they have your back, and your goals become their goals, and they'll applaud you. They'll cheer you on. I actually just watched a really cool documentary, and there was this one guy, a doctor told him he needed to change his lifestyle around, and he went into a gym and he went in there and he was looking around and he was in pretty good shape. He just was making poor decisions in his own personal life that was affecting his health. And he was looking around and he didn't want to be there and he was going to leave. And in rolls this elderly lady who was in a wheelchair, and she rolls in and she kind of looked a little insecure, but she just grabbed the weights. She started doing bicep curls, pressing overhead. And he looked at her and he was like, oh my gosh, she's here. She's not complaining. I'm ready to leave. I got to tell her. And he walks up and he says, hey, I just want to let you know you're inspiring me. And that woman lit up and they both worked out together and they became that they became kind of like a little dynamic duo. And I'm just saying, no matter where you're at, if you need a support system, if you're doing it on your own, if you're doing it for yourself, if you're doing it for your future self, if you're doing it for your kids, if you're doing it for longevity, or if you're doing it just to age well, whatever your whatever your motivation, go for it. Start that journey.
I'm glad you didn't say just do it. So kind of on that note, let's just encourage everybody to just start moving, just start doing something. And then hopefully this podcast is helping you to kind of find that path along that journey. But it is a journey, and let's keep the journey long by aging well.
Age well.
Thank you for listening. I hope you benefited from today's podcast. And until next time, keep aging well.